Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to News 24 Ballot Box. My name is Qaanitah Hunter, and we are coming to you live from the IEC Results Operations Center in Tshwane. It is day 2 of counting of the election results. The IEC was very optimistic that they would be at 90% by last night. They are only at 67% of votes counted as we speak to you now. I'm joined today by Professor Tinyiko Maluleke. Thank you very much for your time, and News 24 elections analyst Dawie Scholtz. Thank you for joining me. Prof. Maluleke, let's talk about what we see on this board behind us. Firstly, are you surprised that the IEC has not maintained its word by reaching 90% of votes counted by last night, and we're still sitting at 67% as we talk?
Not surprised at all. I mean, it was extremely optimistic of them. Even when they made that announcement, if you counted the hours up to that point, you saw that it could never extrapolate into 90% by midnight. So it's good to see a lot of optimism coming from the IEC and a lot of enthusiasm, but it was just too much optimistic this time around. I think at 67% now, we might not even be at 95% by midnight tonight. I hope we are, but we will have to wait and see.
But definitely some interesting things coming out so far. Not too different from what we saw last night, but interesting nonetheless. I am very interested, Prof, in the EFF's showing. And you look, as we speak, they're at 10.2%. Polls put them at about 15%. That was the sort of projection for the EFF. But you're not seeing that kingmaker that we believed was going to be of the EFF in this election.
I think there's a sense in which the EFF is coming into a plateau of sorts in terms of their popularity, but also in terms of their messaging. The EFF, in terms of its current positioning, is not really a local elections party.
Right.
They are a national elections party.
Yeah.
Their messaging is geared towards a national election. And it hasn't worked because clearly people were looking for more local issues. They want to hear about the land and the grants and all the big things that the EFF was going around promising people. So they pitched it at a national level. These are local elections, and they are reaping, if you like, the fruit of that. Secondly, the EFF, there's a sense in which the EFF is refusing to grow up. Because their leaders continue to talk like youth,
right,
instead of talking like the adult leaders that they are. I mean, the voters have trusted them a lot since they were formed. They can't continue to talk like youth, making all manner of inconsequential, meant to be funny sayings which are not amusing at all.
Yeah.
And people, I think, are getting a little bit bored about that.
Dawie, what are the numbers saying about the EFF? Are you picking up anything?
Exactly as you say, it's been quite stable. A little bit up in some places, a little bit down in some places, but very, very similar to what we saw in both 2016 and 2019. The one part of the country that appears interesting is KZN. So they were up a lot in eThekwini. I think the EFF got 4% in 2016. They're up to 10%, so it's more than doubling. But the interesting thing about what is happening in eThekwini and also the rest of KZN is they had already made that jump in 2019.
Okay.
So that increase, you can see in the 2019 numbers, was already the case. And now 2021 is just sort of a replication of what happened in 2019.
Okay.
So for me, it doesn't look like further growth beyond 2019, actually.
Yeah.
It's just what has already happened in 2019 pulling through.
Well, let's talk about eThekwini. It's been fascinating for me. You made projections, Dawie. What did the projections say?
The projection was eThekwini ANC 44, so a big drop. That's minus 12.
Loss.
Exactly. The DA at 26, which is just stable. The EFF at 10, so that's the plus 6.
Yeah.
The IFP at 6.5 or so, up from 4. And Action SA at 2.
So definitely a hung municipality in eThekwini.
Yeah.
It's all indications. News 24 is reporting now that the ANC has sent former Minister Jeff Radebe to lead talks, coalition talks in KwaZulu-Natal, particularly because of how sensitive and how fractured perhaps the relationship had been between the ANC and the IFP. And just for anecdotal purposes, the leader of the EFF in KwaZulu-Natal had said to me earlier that he got a very strange call from the Premier just to ask how things are going for them. And obviously this is the first talks, talks about talks and the fraternization that's going to happen. But I think the way to describe eThekwini is unimaginable, right,
Yeah.
Prof?
Yes, it is. It's going to be some kind of Waterloo for the ANC, it seems to me. And the ANC shouldn't be really surprised. There has been a lot of division in that part of the world around the personality of Jacob Zuma, obviously, and who supports him and who doesn't support him, and around many other issues within the ANC itself. And of course, the relationship between the ANC and the IFP has always been fractious. And I think what we have seen now is that many people are either going back to the IFP or backing the EFF or staying at home.
Yes.
I'm talking about former ANC supporters.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is the reason we see what's happening there.
I think there's a lot more to speak about in terms of eThekwini, Prof, because of what we saw happening in July. KwaZulu-Natal, but eThekwini was the hotbed of the unrest that took place. But what you also saw is those structures of the ANC loyal to people like Zandile Gomede and then former President Jacob Zuma being mobilized against the incumbent President Cyril Ramaphosa. And effectively what you had is ANC mobilizing against ANC. How much of what we saw in July impacts what we see on the board now?
Well, definitely there is a huge impact, because what was July? July was the ANC taking its eyes off the ball. You could argue that it's a faction of the ANC that did that, but it was the ANC taking its eyes off the ball. It was the police under the governance of the ANC looking the other way, if not being implicated in what was happening there. It was a leadership that was prevaricating, not speaking clearly about whether it is necessary that those who support former President Zuma do this or not.
Yeah.
In the beginning, they were not very clear. They were not able to say, we condemn this,
Yes,
it shouldn't
yes.
happen. And all of these things, I think, are the chicken that are coming back home to roost now, because they were not decisive about what was happening. In fact, suspicions are that they were decisive, but in an underhanded manner, that in fact some of them in leadership were supportive of the looting in one way or the other.
Absolutely, and I think that there is the sense in KwaZulu-Natal, or in that region at least, around which ANC is it, and the factionalism will definitely have some role to play in coalition talks. And I think that it's very telling for me that the ANC would rather send a former minister, someone from National, to go in and lead talks instead of allowing the local leadership to lead those conversations. But we'll talk now about coalitions, Prof, before we get to you, Dawie. I know you want to make some projections.
Yes, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
You're always ready to make some projections, but coalition talks have started in earnest. I get a sense that the ANC is eating humble pie. Maybe wrong.
They've been eating humble pie for some time now.
Okay.
The fact that they approached the electorate and said, we are sorry, that's humble pie.
All right. How do you think these coalition talks are going to be different than 2016?
Well, you see, the fact that they've already approached Jeff Radebe to lead is quite instructive.
Right.
In that it's dawning on many political parties that coalitions work when the personalities involved in the coalition relate well. So it's not
It's a lot
merely,
about ego.
It's a lot about egos.
Yeah.
So it's not merely the ideologies of the political parties, it is who. So if we can look at those coalitions which worked well, which worked for 5 years, or at least for 4.5 years, you'll find that the personalities involved from the various political parties relate well to one another. And in KZN, it will be very hard to find among the local current crop of local leaders people who will relate well to the IFP, for example, or to the EFF, for example, or even to one another within the ANC, the factions within the ANC. So that's why I think someone like Jeff Radebe is being parachuted in to deal with that, because the era of coalitions is not one that we can framework in a straitjacket.
Yeah.
Each municipality will have to cobble together a coalition that works for them,
Yeah.
picking very carefully who the personalities are and what the terms of operation are going to be. This is how it's going to work. It's not going to be, so we are EFF, we've got this number, let's talk to so and so because they have an ideology like this. You've got to look to the nitty-gritty, and the ANC is beginning to do that already, I think, in sending Jeff Radebe.
But let's talk about the Democratic Alliance very quick. They also, a lot of their municipalities that they were previously the majority in have slipped, not a lot, but a sizable number. And they have to also now go out to smaller political parties, but they have been very antagonistic to smaller political parties, particularly the Freedom Front Plus, because they wanted that vote, or maybe not antagonistic to the Freedom Front Plus, but they worked really hard to get the Freedom Front Plus vote, and it doesn't look like it. It looks like the Freedom Front Plus has in fact doubled their support in this election. How do you think they're going to handle this?
Well, they actually were antagonistic to smaller parties.
Yes.
Let's be honest about that. How and why? Because their main message was, it's us versus the ANC. The rest of you should either vote for us, or if you are not smart, vote for the ANC. So that message alone antagonizes many smaller parties, because they say the DA doesn't even recognize that we exist. They think that they are the only bull in the crawl and we must support them. So that alone, I think, has already caused a lot of animosity between the DA and the smaller parties. The DA also has a history of not being very good at running coalition government. They're sort of the bully. They've been seen as the bully of coalition governance. That kind of arrogance of power, which we have seen in both the ANC and the DA, is precisely what these elections have undermined.
Yeah.
These results have undermined that sense of entitlement, arrogance of power, which you saw in the ANC and the DA. We lead the coalition. You heard that phrase quite often from the DA.
Yeah.
That kind of talk
Yeah.
is not going to be very helpful this time around.
One last question before we get to Dawie, Professor. How much do personalities, leadership personalities in political parties play in coalition talks? So the likability. We ran polls around the favorability of John Steenhuisen, and he proves to be pretty unpopular, and also in the Democratic Alliance. So how much of charisma, that type of people skills do you need when negotiating a coalition?
Oh no, it's all about that. If anything, it really is about personality, respectability, gravitas, so, and of course trustworthiness.
Yeah.
If people do not trust you, if they don't think you have gravitas, if you can't even marshal your own people around you, because coalitions will be about ideas and about trust and about local issues, the ability to focus on local issues. And I think So your John Steenhuisens, all your leaders, your Malimas, your Ramaphosas, your Herman Mashabas, they are now competing at that level of who is the most trusted among them. Can we trust this guy? Can we work with him? Or this woman? Unfortunately, not very many women.
Not at all, unfortunately. All right, Dawie, you're looking at Soweto. Tell me, what are you seeing there?
So we've obviously done a Johannesburg projection previously before, right? But we now have quite a lot of numbers from different places across the city, and so we're doing some detailed analyses of each of the major townships, basically, to kind of get a sense of how things are going. And what's happening in Soweto is just unbelievably interesting. So we know that Soweto is about 600,000 voters, roughly. And we know that we currently have about 35% of those votes declared. So I think we've got a good sample from which to draw inferences. And I mean, if you just look at the history of Soweto to start with that, right? And I'm going to use 2011 as the reference because I think it's interesting. So in 2011, 55% of Soweto turned out to vote. That's just 2 local government elections ago. The ANC won 87% of the vote. And in that election, the DA won 6% of the vote, okay? Fast forward 10 years to this year, right? We are now projecting that in Soweto, the final result is going to be ANC on 53. So just think about it, 86 in 2011 to 53 in this election. That's minus 33. That's really, really significant. The DA is down to 3%, so they've like almost halved their vote in Soweto in the last 10 years. The EFF is at 13, which is very much like last time. So kind of a similar stable result. That's just what we were saying about the EFF. The support seems stable, not going down, but or plateaued. You can use different words, right? But but staying where it was previously. And Action SA coming in at 21%. So taking 21% of the vote in Soweto. Clearly, that is kind of what's primarily driven the ANC down in Soweto. But and turnout of 41%. So to me, what's interesting is Soweto turnout was 55. It's 41 now, so just that number alone. There's a lot of people who used to kind of vote ANC who are not voting, and now of the people who are going to vote, an increasing number are voting against the ANC. And there's one interesting observation about this, is in previous elections, we've always said there's frustration with the ANC for the last 2 or 3 elections, but it's always been there's frustration, so people will not go vote, right?
Right.
Now it's very much true, clearly, that is also the case here, but now there's an additional kind of ingredient here is some of the people who are voting are actually actively voting against the ANC, which is more so than before. And that is what's creating this kind of shift in a place like Joburg, right? Because we were having in the last local government election a conversation about the ANC being at 45, 46. The projection is 33. So that's far away from 50, and it's because of what's happening in places like Soweto. And I've done the numbers for the other townships. It's similar. I will confess that Soweto is the worst for the ANC, which is also surprising because
it's not surprising because you saw it very evidently in the election campaign. We had ANC head of elections Fikile Mbalula here yesterday, and he was talking about, I mean, what are you going to say to a lady who didn't have electricity for 3 years? There's nothing you can say. You can't say in 3 weeks we're going to give you electricity, because also what the shenanigans are at Eskom, and that the electricity is actually not going to be fixed. And so there was a big concession yesterday that they had truly and utterly failed in Soweto, and there was not much they could do, Prof.
Yeah, look, I mean, as someone born and bred in Soweto, I know that there has been a lot of anger around the electricity issue for a long time, not just now. I think that's one of the places where the president was booed when he tried
multiple
to
times
go and to campaign, and unfortunately there were even march to his home in Soweto. So there is a lot of anger against the ANC in Soweto around electricity issues, but also around general service delivery issues. And Soweto is an important symbol of the struggle in this country. Soweto is an important place in South Africa, in the history of this country. That's where Mandela's home is. That's where our Nobel laureates are, in one street. So if Soweto turns against the ANC, that is huge. It's not like some place somewhere in the middle of nowhere that is fed up with the ANC. This is the heart of the struggle. This is where the ANC was most vibrant. You know, so I am waiting to see the final numbers, because I really think Soweto is a very important signal of what the electorate is saying in these elections. The voice of the electorate, what they mean, what they are saying, what they are feeling, I think that the pulse could be Soweto.
And look, you talk about 53% in Soweto, 41% turnout. The 2024 election is only 3 years away, and that if that happens, or anything like it happens in 2024, Gauteng province is not being governed by the ANC in 2024, if that's the case. You know, as you say, Prof, I think Soweto is often a leading indicator for other parts of the country. And so it will be very, very interesting to see the rest of the townships once we have more numbers, right? Because I think there are serious implications for the 2024 election.
I want to talk a little bit about 2024 before we wrap, but Dawie, do you have any other projections for us?
There's just one that we haven't spoken about. We've published it, but it's maybe just useful to put it on the stream as well. Is Buffalo City, right?
Okay.
And it is actually an interesting one.
So Buffalo City is in Eastern Cape.
It's Eastern Cape.
Right.
So the projection for the Buffalo City is that the ANC will win it and will keep it. It's their best, by far their best result. So getting in at 60%, which is exactly the same number as 2016, which is interesting because they're down significantly in every metro in the country except Buffalo City, where they've stayed exactly the same, 60%. And it's a testament to, I think, the ANC actually doing quite well in the Eastern Cape in this election. So overperforming in the Eastern Cape by a lot, which is interesting. And I mean, not growing, but certainly keeping a very high level, which is impressive. And I think the other thing as well that's interesting about this one is that the DA has gone from 23 to 19, so -4 for the DA. That's the projection.
In the province or in Buffalo City?
In Buffalo City,
okay.
Yeah. And the EFF has gone from 8 to 12, and the UDM 1. So there's been a kind of sort of slight rearranging of the vote there. The ANC staying stable, DA going down a little bit, EFF going up a little bit. And if you look at the demographics underlying this, it's very clear where it's coming from, is that the DA got about 7 or 8% of the black vote in Buffalo City in 2016. They're down to 3 or 4. So they've halved their support with black voters in Buffalo City. It's gone to the EFF, not to the ANC, and that's how that rearrangement has taken place in Buffalo City. So a great result for the ANC, actually, the best one by far of all the
Someone said earlier that the ANC in the Eastern Cape is like a cheating spouse who says I'm sorry, and then the wife says it's fine, because you know, the level of the lack of services in the Eastern Cape is just outstanding. When we saw our News 24 out of order index, which really painted a picture of how bad things are, Eastern Cape was very, very, very bad.
One of the poorest provinces.
One of the poorest. I think the AG has run out of metaphors, of adjectives to describe how bad performing the Eastern Cape is. Yet you see this constant rewarding to the ANC. However, I also think that it was a missed opportunity by parties from like the EFF, who could have gone in and put up a good campaign and become a very strong opposition in the Eastern Cape, Prof?
Well, you know, the Eastern Province, actually, the Eastern Cape rather, you recall that before the Zuma factor,
right,
they were the largest ANC province and the most supportive of the ANC.
Right.
It was Zuma who added KZN to the Eastern Cape. So it seems to me that the chips are down for the ANC, and when the chips are down for the ANC, they go back to their traditional stronghold, which is the Eastern Cape. And I think there's part of that history. They've got very deep roots in the Eastern Cape. There was a time when in the first cabinet, maybe not the first, but during Thabo Mbeki's time, more than 60 or 70% of members of cabinet were coming from there. And of course, if you look at the ANC stalwarts, quite a big number of them come from there. So it's a province that is deeply rooted in the DNA of the ANC. It will take a lot of work from opposition parties to unseat the ANC there. But the slide has begun.
Yeah.
The slide has begun, and there is no telling where it will stop. And I think the Eastern Cape is not completely safe in the next elections that are coming up.
But Prof, let's talk about how much can we read into this results in relation to the 2024 general elections. It's different issues. A lot of people say don't compare apples with bananas. But definitely there's some things that some lessons that we can learn from this for the next general elections. What are your takeaways?
Well, I think the electorate is fed up. I need some water.
Water for Prof.
Maybe
please.
you continue a little bit.
Okay,
Shall I
Dawie, yes.
venture a first answer? Now, look, I think this
That's
topic
my
of
water, actually.
this topic of comparing apples with bananas, right?
Yeah.
So I look at these election results over time in different kind of elections, 2019, 2016, 2014. And it's just fascinating that the voting patterns really are comparable across those elections. So what you see happening in a local government election, you also see happening at a national government election, with the single biggest difference being turnout, actually. People turn out more in national government elections, but the same types of people vote in the same type of way across the two different elections. And the one thing that is, I think, very interesting from this election is just we had intensely low turnout in this election. We had quite low turnout in the last national government election. I think turnout, and whether we see something like a 65 or a 60% turnout in the next election, is a critical question for the legitimacy of the election, because now it's not a local government election, it's a national government election. That's going to be critical, and I think a really big question mark about that for me, and that's the one big thing. And then the other thing is, look, I think the demographic shifts within the electorate and the different levels of support within the electorate that we're seeing.
It's perfectly okay. We've been talking for a very long time, Professor.
The demographic shifts that we're seeing in this election, based on the previous experience that I've had with elections, are going to be very likely the same demographic questions we ask in the next election. So Afrikaans voters that are now between the DA and the Freedom Front Plus are still going to be between the DA and the Freedom Front Plus in the next election. The voters of Soweto who are now between Action SA and the ANC are still going to be between Action SA and the ANC in the next election, etc., etc. So I think these trends are very indicative of what is to come.
And in the next election, there's also going to be the independent component in the general election that we never had before.
For the first time.
Yes.
For me, the key thing is this, that 50% mark.
Yes.
Will the local elections results infect the national election with a below 50% showing for the ANC?
And what do you think?
That is the big question. I think it will. The ANC is likely to lose some provinces this time around. You remember how close they were to losing Gauteng. So and that will be the effect of this of these local elections. Secondly, people have discovered that not only can you stay away from voting and the heavens do not fall, you can also vote against the ANC and the heavens do not fall.
Jesus has not returned.
Yes, Jesus. Well, maybe he's returning in some ways, if we may use the Zuma metaphor.
The Zuma metaphor.
Yeah. So I think these are some of the implications of these elections now for the national elections, and of course many of the points that Dawie made, I agree with.
All right, Dawie, any final thoughts as we wrap up? It's still going to be a long day for you. Are any more forecasts expected?
No, but this afternoon we'll be doing a bit of a deep dive, as I've done on Soweto, on other key areas in the country, and we'll be sharing that with the viewers as well later on.
Okay, I'm very interested to see the bigger picture of antagonistic. I saw your forecast early this morning when I woke up, and it really made me tingle a little bit, because definitely unimaginable results in those type of areas, and particularly, like you said, in Soweto. Prof, what are you looking out for the rest of the day?
You know, the action essay is quite interesting for me, especially in places like Soweto. It is probably the biggest among the smallest, obviously.
Yes.
The biggest crossover political party in the country at the moment.
Absolutely.
Through these local elections, in that it's able to attract people. And
in Joburg.
Well, in Johannesburg, but there are a few places. I mean, I don't think they featured the candidates in every.
No, but I'm saying, in like Ekurhuleni, the showing wasn't so
where
good.
they have competed.
Okay.
Where they have competed, they have shown themselves to be the biggest crossover political party. And almost everywhere they have competed, the municipalities are hung.
Yeah.
And they are a big factor
Yes, sir.
in causing that situation.
Can I say one thing about this?
Yeah.
I think you both are correct. You are correct that it's more in Johannesburg, right? So they're about 16, 17 in Joburg, there are 6 or 7 in Ekurhuleni, it looks like 8 in Tshwane, 2 in eThekwini. So more in Joburg, so they have big work to do to increase the footprint beyond, to the Joburg level beyond Joburg. But then if you go into each of those cities, the Prof is absolutely correct, it's fascinating. In Johannesburg, they won 18% in like in the suburbs, right? Like in Parkhurst or whatever, and they won 18% in the townships in general. So I don't think I've ever seen a political party that does relatively well, that does well in both the townships and the suburbs. I've only ever seen it like this, or maybe a little bit like this, but I've never seen this. And it's interesting. It's that way in Joburg. Yes, they did less in Tshwane, right? They only got 8 or 9, but they still got 8 or 9 across everything. And the eThekwini numbers are smaller, only 2%, but it's 2% everywhere. Which is fascinating.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much for watching this discussion. We will have another live discussion at 6:30 this evening, hosted by my colleague Adrian Besson, as the numbers literally trickle in. It's still at 60% from where he started 30 minutes ago. But thank you very much for joining. For more elections coverage, go to news24.com/elections.